I'm your host, Brian Scott. Today, we're going to talk about something super fascinating. That's the article that's found on the CIA website that is approved for release and is available there. And it's a fascinating document, an assessment of the GateWay process. The GateWay process is a process developed by Robert Monroe, a really fascinating consciousness pioneer. If you ever want to read a really interesting book, just read his original book, and Journeys Out of the Body in 1971, where he talks about out-of-body experience. But he developed this system, which is very similar. We've advanced a little bit more. If there's so much on YouTube that is using these different technologies, but he experimented with binaural and holographic sound techniques, and he achieved worldwide recognition as a consciousness explorer using these sound patterns, which are very beneficial. There's a technology called HemiSync. It's assisted by specialists in psychology and biochemistry and even electrical engineering. And if you read about it, there's even some places where they have actually found that using the HemiSync technology can replace fentanyl in surgical situations. So it can actually be an actual scientific reducer of pain. And so he founded the Monroe Institute and wrote several other books. It's very interesting. He's been found all over the place. You can read, there's some articles in the Wall Street Journal. But it's always interesting to read an intelligent summary. This is done without bias. The person that's giving the intelligence is giving the actual truth of a particular situation. If you can ever read an intelligence analysis, it's the best, because you know you're not getting any BS. It's not like you're reading an article that has a certain spin on it. They just want to get to the truth. And this document really does a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily verify or contradict with anything we've talked about so far on the podcast. It could, or it couldn't. It evokes a lot of different things that we've talked about, and in many ways may actually add credibility to everything we're talking about. Even Neville Goddard. It does talk about the holographic theory of the universe. And if you replace holograms with dreams, it's a similar idea. But the way they explain it gives you a better understanding of it. And it may be confirming the theory by Thomas Campbell, who is saying that it is a hologram and the players of the game are outside of the game. Perhaps that we are the players of the game. There's a lot of stuff that we can talk about that will come out of this document. It proves things as simple as the law of attraction or reality transurfing or a number of different things. I still enjoyed experimenting with different kinds of music. I do think that Metaverse's music is on the same level of HemiSync, but I've listened to all their stuff and I've tested this stuff out. And the best summary I can give before we start is whether or not it's a valid process, I can't say. I think that is up to you to decide if it's a valid process. If you try it out, you can find on the internet, you can download it. There's an app where you can download HemiSync. They're talking about in this document, a stream of energy is projected with total coherence of both frequency and amplitude, such that the surface area of a laser beam contains billions of times the concentrated energy found in a similar surface area on the sun. As the body is turned into a coherent oscillator vibrating in harmony with surrounding electrostatic medium, the specific exercises included in the GateWay meditations enjoin the participant to build up the energy field surrounding their body, presumably by using energy from the Earth's field, which the body is now in training because of its ability to resonate with it. So in that way, it's similar also to the Merkaba, which is just a different technique. So the terms matter and energy may not be defined. It depends on how you define it. There's some different words, and Science knows that electrons, which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom, and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. And they talk about accessing the consciousness grid of the hologram, which is discussed by Drunvalo Melchizedek in his wonderful movie, The Birth of a New Humanity, where he talks about the creation of the consciousness grid or the unity grid around the earth. So it could be something related to that. So the brain in phase, the consciousness process, is most easily envisaged if we picture the holographic input with a three-dimensional grid system superimposed over it, such that all of the energy patterns contained within can be described in terms of three-dimensional geometry using mathematics to reduce the data to two-dimensional form. To the extent that the gateway process succeeds for you in bringing about refinement in the energy matrix of the mind, it succeeds in expanding in altering the human consciousness so that it can perceive without recourse to the intercession of the physical senses, such that ever more of the universal hologram can ultimately be perceived and understood. But you can replace some of these words if you understand that everything's a hologram. If everything is a dream, it's somewhat similar, and everything is one thought, which would be a part of one hologram. And what is the point of the game? Well, we're learning that. But I wanted to read this to you, and I thought you might enjoy it because there's some incredibly twisted and fascinating stuff. And this can be found on the CIA.gov website, available for reading, approved for release. I believe the date here is 2003. This has been up. People haven't talked about it. The document was originally written in June of 1983. Subject: analysis and assessment of GateWay Process. To the Commander, U.S. Army Operational Group. Department of the Army, U.S. Army Operational Group, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command. Number 1. You tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon may become clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it in the frame of reference suited to objective assessment. 2. I began the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation so that their objective and mode of functioning could be compared in the reader's mind with the Gateway experience as the model of its underlying mechanics was developed. Additionally, that introductory material is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicated that at the time these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the Gateway experience. Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, "You are not thinking, you are merely being logical." The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualization that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So, to borrow Dr. Bohr's mode of expression, parts of this paper will require not only logic but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve a complete comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. 4. Paradoxically, having gone to such great lengths to avoid trying to render judgments based on an occult or dogmatic frame of reference, in the end I found it necessary to return, at least briefly, to the question of the impact of the Gateway experience on common belief systems. I did so because, although it was essential to avoid attempting to render assessment in the context of such systems, I felt that it was necessary, after having completed the analysis, to point out the resulting conclusions do not do any violence to the fundamental mainstream of either Western or Eastern belief systems. Unless that point is clearly established, the danger exists that some people will reject the whole concept of the Gateway experience in the mistaken belief that it contradicts and is therefore alien to all they hold to be right and true. 5. This study is certainly not designed to be the last word on the subject, but I hope that the validity of its basic structure and of the fundamental concepts upon which it is based will make it a useful guide for other USA Einscom personnel who are required to take the Gateway training or work with Gateway materials. Wayne McDonnell, Commander. The Gateway experience, brain hemisphere synchronization in perspective. 1. Introduction. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, the Gateway experience involving brain hemisphere synchronization, or hemisync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which underlay operation of related methods such as hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe what Gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that share some common aspects with the Gateway experience, but which are nevertheless different. In this way, we can develop a frame of reference at the outset, which will provide useful concepts to explain and understand Gateway by comparison as we proceed. 2. Hypnosis. According to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and biomedical engineering models of Itzhak Bentov, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers and lower cerebral emotional portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain following successful disengagement of the stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allowing passage to the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere, which functions as the non-critical, holistic, non-verbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom or through reduction to a soporific, semi-sleep state, external stimuli, to include hypnotic suggestions, are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere, where they are acted and accepted upon directly. The result may involve an emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, sensory motor responses requiring involvement of the cortex, and so on. Both the sensory and the motor cortices of the right cerebral portion of the brain contain a sequence of points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to points in the body. Stimulation of the corresponding area on the cortex causes intermediate response in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, induction of the suggestion that the left leg is numb, if it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged and is referred to the appropriate pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral portion or in the cortex of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as one that informs the hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration or powers of memory would be responded to in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity normally held in reserve as a result of left hemisphere selection and control processes. This aspect will become significant in the context of the gateway process, when attention is given to examining the way that hypnosis may be used to accelerate progress in the early stages of the gateway experience. 3. Transcendental meditation. On the other hand, transcendental meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense and protracted, single-minded concentration on the process of drawing energy up the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. As a result, according to Bentov, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus starting from toes and on up. The Bentov biomedical model, as described in a book by Lee Sinella, MD, entitled Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence, states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of the altered rhythm of heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation, and which set up sympathetic vibrations in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities, which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain.